My name is Cindy, and I am her. I was raised in a family of 3 boys. I was the oldest. My dad, I think, was very disappointed that I was the oldest and a girl. My dad was abused when he was a child, and I don't think he had very good parenting skills. And so we were raised that if we stepped out of line, we were disciplined physically. And as I matured physically, I was also disciplined verbally in an unkind way. My mother was abused physically by my father if she stepped in and intervened in the disciplining of us children. I became pregnant when I was 17 years old. My father took that very hard. And the last time that he abused me, my son was 2 years old. He didn't like the way that he perceived I was raising my son, and so told me that he was going to keep my son. And I attempted to leave his house and take my son with me. Ultimately, I escaped. The police were called. I had bruises, scrapes. As far as my father's concerned, none of that has ever happened. But I know now that it really impacted the choices that I made in men as I grew up. I married a man when my son was 4 years old, who my father disliked greatly, and I know now it's because he was just like my dad. And they had active dislike for one another, but I know now that it's because they recognized traits in one another, like traits that weren't good. My husband verbally and physically abused me. He always knew how to abuse me physically in areas where it wouldn't show. There was sexual abuse, but I never felt like there was the option to leave. We had another son biologically between us, and as the kids grew older and I became more educated and more successful in my career, the abuse became worse. His use of drugs and alcohol grew. He had his own successful business, but that began to dwindle and he stayed home more and more. What I didn't know at the time was the abuse of the children that was going on, and the children, didn't tell me because they didn't want to make things worse between the 2 adults in the household. The last time that abuse occurred, I came home after a long day. My husband had been drinking and using drugs all day, and wanted to pick a fight and wanted to have sex. And when I denied him that, he started beating me. And we were in our bedroom, and it escalated and escalated. And at some point, our children entered the room. I had a 12-year-old and a 17-year-old. And the children interceded, stepped in between. I managed to calm things down, sent the children in their bedroom. My husband said, as is the cycle of abuse, I really love you, I'm really sorry, let's make amends, let's have sex, let's go to bed, let's call it a night. and I said, you know, I need to lock up the house, need to close things up. And with that, he went to bed, and luckily he fell asleep. And I remained up the rest of the night with the front door open, sitting next to the front door, hoping that he wouldn't wake up, because there were weapons in the house, there were guns in the house. I knew his violent nature, just hoping that he wasn't going to wake up and use any of those guns. And when morning came, I got ready for work just like I always did, dropped the kids at school, went to work. By an act of God, one of my patients that day, I worked in a dental office, one of my patients that day was a sheriff's deputy. And one of the assistants that I worked with, her husband was a sheriff's deputy. She knew right away that something was wrong, and I finally disclosed to her what was going on and showed her what my body looked like underneath the uniform. She promptly had the sheriff's office notified, and they spent the day actively walking my case through the judicial system and had a restraining order by that night. They removed my husband from the house, but before we could even get back into the house, he was calling on the phone, asking for forgiveness, that he was going to change his ways, everything was going to be better. By the time, I wasn't going to press charges. I just wanted him to go away. But he kept stalking me at work, at home, trying to get into the house. So I went ahead and pressed charges. The DA took the case, because so rarely do women decide to press charges. The DA was very glad that there was a woman that finally was going to step forward. By the time the case went to trial, there were 21 charges against him for stalking. He denied vehemently that he had done anything wrong. His parents paid for his lawyer. He went to the judge stating that he was innocent. But when he found out that I was going to testify, he totally recanted and said, "I'm guilty." He was sentenced to state prison for corporal battery. He served 3 years in state prison and was released. Within 6 months, he was charged with rape of a 15-year-old girl. He went back to state prison. He was released after 18 months, and he was charged again after release on a drug charge. So he's been in and out of prison. At this point, I know that he's in Northern California, close enough to me that he could drive and be in contact with me. But because it's been long enough since he harmed me bodily, I don't get to know where he is exactly. Our youngest son couldn't take his anger out on his dad. He's taken it out on me. The last time I saw my youngest son, he was 18 and now he's 33. I have no idea where he is. He didn't want to be part of a family that was an abusive family, so he left. For 6 years after my divorce, I worked, but I drank. I was depressed. I wasn't in a very good place. I finally went to counseling. It was a really long road. And I started working as a victim's advocate and in a safe house. And that helped a lot. I met a wonderful man who put up with all my craziness. All of the triggers that I had, we've worked through those. He's had plenty of opportunity to walk away, and he never has. There's a lot of people in my life now who don't know my story, and those that I tell, some of them walk away because they're not comfortable with it. But the most impactful thing about my story, I think, is I don't fit the mold. I'm not one of those stupid women that stays with the man because they don't have money and they don't have the means. I had the means. I could have walked away, and I stayed. And that's my story.